Another Christmas story is when Mikhail Gorbachev resigned. And on December 25th, Mikhail Gorbachev, the leader of the USSR, had resigned. He resigned 1991. So the fall of the Berlin Wall was 89, 90, and then 91 on Christmas Day. The USSR ceased to exist. Essentially, Gorbachev said that the entity of USSR wasn't even there, so it wouldn't even have mattered. So here is History.com's take on the whole thing. He announces he's resigning as president of the Soviet Union. In truth, there wasn't much of a Soviet Union from which to resign. Just 4 days earlier, 11 of the former Soviet republics had established the Commonwealth of Independent States, effectively dismembering the USSR. The Soviet Union, for all intents and purposes, had ceased to exist. So it was more of a formality since it wasn't even, in of existence. The member states of the Commonwealth of Independent States, there is Armenia, Azerbaijan, I don't even know the name of that, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Moldova, Russia, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and Ukraine. So those would be the 11 member states, and I think one of them actually had dropped out recently, Georgia. Georgia used to be a member state, but it was withdrawn in 2008. So Mikhail Gorbachev, he resigns, and he tries to, basically it seems like the collapse of the USSR falls on Gorbachev. Yeltsin was sort of, being a dissenter and sort of shaking things up, but Yeltsin didn't help much at all. When Yeltsin, he was the one that was in charge from 91 to 99, but by 99 he also resigns and gives power to Putin. So Putin was sort of given power. He wasn't democratically elected. So Putin doesn't have the same respect for freedom and democracy that Gorbachev had. And so that was actually one of the few things that Gorbachev could sort of have, bragged about. What Gorbachev said, and he actually even admits this, that because he allowed Yeltsin to kind of make fun of him and shit, that was the reason. He was too liberal. And eventually the KGB is going to put Gorbachev under house arrest for 3 days. You stay right there in that house. So, once it shows that he doesn't have power, that he got arrested, right? Gorbachev, he listed his achievements: free elections. So elections came to Russia because of Gorbachev, free press, freedom of worship, representative legislatures, and a multi-party system. So he, brought human rights, free enterprise, removal of a nuclear threat were all in place. So Gorbachev, he says that he brought freedom to Russia, but Russia wasn't ready for freedom. It's a very complicated process, to be honest with you. I was watching 30 minutes of the documentary on RT, The Collapse of an Empire, and there's just a lot of things that were going on, so it's not like very clear this is what happened. There was a coup, August 1991, where he was put in house arrest for 3 days, but then later on Gorbachev was forced to fire large numbers of his Politburo, and in several cases he had to arrest him. And these were people that had supported him or who Gorbachev had promoted. So his buddies, his friends, they forced him to arrest his buddies. There's Pavlov, Yazov, Krukov, Pugo. Pugo was found shot, the so-called Gang of Eight. And so let's keep on going with History.com. In his farewell speech to the nation, Gorbachev indicated that the recent establishment of the CIS was the primary motive for his resignation. So the Commonwealth of Independent States, they had combined in order to have a loose association of the newly formed independent states. So since those 11, countries that I had just mentioned, Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan and Belarus and Georgia, they had all agreed to be a part of this Commonwealth of Independent States, which was the next sort of amalgamation or association of nations for the former Soviet Union. And when the Soviet Union collapses, it just becomes Russia. Russia claims all of Soviet Union's overseas territories and the nuclear weapons. So they still had nuclear bombs. They also still had an empire. They still, had a vast. Russia's a huge fucking country. So just because they didn't have some of the satellite countries doesn't mean that Russia themselves didn't have, didn't have their own country. So, and then the USSR was established by Lenin in the Bolshevik Revolution. Lenin and Stalin and Trotsky and the rest. So that's where the state actually began. The USSR actually began, under Lenin. So, let's see. Claiming he was concerned about the fact that the people of this country are ceasing to become citizens of a great power, and the consequences may be very difficult for all of us to deal with. In words that were sometimes prideful, sometimes resentful, Gorbachev stated that he stood on his record of achievement. He claims he overseen the Soviet Union's trip down the road of democracy. His reforms steered the communist economy towards a market economy. So it was the collapse of the Soviet Union was also the collapse of the communist dictatorship, because it was run by authoritarian, an authoritarian creed. He declared that the Russian people were living in a new world in which an end has been put to the Cold War and the arms race, admitting there were mistakes made. Gorbachev remained adamant that he never had any regrets about the policies that he pursued. So he says that he had no regrets. It almost seems like liberalism and democracy and freedom is what led to the collapse. He's, helped to cut back his nuclear weapons, his arsenal. Reagan was very tough on them, right? Tear down this wall. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. And it just seems like the American leadership was putting on a hard-line approach, then Gorbachev was trying to make it more conciliatory. He goes towards America with the market economy and with the democracy and the parliamentary elections and the free press and the freedom, religious freedom. So I think that he doesn't have any regrets, because it's like, well, what's next, okay? Since Yeltsin went up the power, now you got Putin. Putin had to go, he had to sort of shove his will down everybody's throats. There was an election, but who knows how, it might have been him, the KGB, that had a house arrested him, in 91, because, Putin's part of the KGB. So by having those elections, right, you give the opportunity for some other person to take your power away from you. Stalin, ruled with an iron fist for like 3, 4, 5 decades. And while there's a lot of criticisms of Stalin, he stopped the Nazis and he kept the USSR intact. He kept it all together. Castro took the collapse of the USSR very hard. He was kind of like, shit, now what happens now? In reality, Gorbachev had lost much of his power and prestige in the Soviet Union even before the establishment of the Commonwealth of Independent States. The economy was unstable. Reagan made a bunch of jokes. 1 out of 7 Russians didn't even own a car. No one seemed pleased by Gorbachev. Some opponents demanded even more political freedom, while hardliners in his government opposed any movement towards reform. No reform! No, we want complete reform. August 91, he survived a coup attempt only through the assistance of the Russian Federation President Boris Yeltsin. So Boris Yeltsin, while being an agitator, also wound up saving Gorbachev, and then Boris Yeltsin, becomes the president or prime minister. He becomes the head of state of Russia. Following the failed attempt, Yeltsin became a vocal critic of the slow pace of economic and political reforms in the country. As Gorbachev's power slipped away, Yeltsin took over the Kremlin and other Soviet government facilities and replaced the Soviet flag with the flag of Russia. After over 70 years of existence, the Soviet Union, America's arch enemy in the Cold War, was gone. It was gone. So this is a Christmas Day story. 1991, Soviet flag came down, the Russian flag came up. So that's December 25th, right? So that's I don't know what to say about that. So I don't like empires. I don't like authoritarian rule and communism. It's the engine, the way Rand Paul talks about, the engine of capitalism is stronger than the engine of communism, because capitalism pits everybody against each other and people are trying to outdo one another. Competition makes you stronger, right? Then therefore the engine of capitalism is stronger than the engine of communism. So I don't have all the, I don't completely understand it, but that's sort of my take on what happened December 25th, 1991. And we know Gorbachev resigned, the USSR ceased to exist, so it was gone. And it was just Russia and these amalgamation of states with the Commonwealth of Independent States after his resignation. So, Christmas stories, all right?